Hi everyone, we're here at IAFP 2025 in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm here with Ben Miller, who is COO and EVP of Regulatory and Scientific Affairs at the Acheson Group. Thanks so much for being here today, Ben.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So there have been a lot of changes this year at agencies like FDA, USDA, CDC, and other agencies, from mass layoffs to resource cuts. So how has this upheaval affected the food safety industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start a little bit in terms of my background. So I actually came out of a state regulatory program. Ran the human and animal food inspection program for the state of Minnesota. So I've been with Acheson Group for about 7 years, but before that was in a regulatory capacity. So I've had the chance to work with, FDA, CDC, other USDA over the years. And I think the bottom line is that these cuts and changes really are going to, I think, have a significant impact on the agency's ability to do good food safety work. Be that from domestic inspections to just all the research that goes on, that the agencies do. I think consumers, we take safe food for granted, right? Like when we go to the grocery store, it's like, yep, we're expecting the food that we buy to be safe, and there's a lot that goes into that, and I think when we look at some of the challenges that the federal workforce has had and is continuing to face, it's we're only going to start to realize what some of those impacts are. So I think from an industry regulatory kind of partnership standpoint, we're entering a tough period. So I think industry is going to have to look at and kind of double down on the way that they approach managing their hazards, all aspects of food safety. Not that they don't do that now, but I think looking at some of the emerging science and guidance from the FDA or USDA, I don't think we're going to see that as much in the short term. So I think I don't want to say industry's on its own, and but we're going to have to navigate some of these things maybe with less guidance from the federal agencies than we've seen before.
Okay. Where do you recommend industry turns to guidance in the absence of that?
Yeah, I think obviously meetings like IAFP are still a great opportunity to come together and have conversations with your peers, and the regulatory community is still here. That's good. I know FDA and USDA were able to send a number of folks to this meeting, and it's fortunate that their presence is here. And academia is still there doing research, although their research funding is also sort of in question because of a lot of the grants that they receive also come from the federal government, not all of them. So, we're sort of looking at a holistic challenge, I think, when we think about food safety. Obviously, companies like the Acheson Group, we provide consulting services, and so admittedly, we've been fortunate to hire a few folks from FDA recently that have retired from the agency. So we're able to kind of bring in those years of experience and turn around and then help industry kind of navigate some of those challenges. But it is a different landscape.
Yeah, okay. What advice do you have for food safety and quality assurance professionals who are navigating this uncertain time?
Yeah, I think one, a lot of what we've heard here at the conference is kind of return to basics, and I think there's definitely a grain of truth to that. Look at your hazards. How are you managing those hazards? What are we doing in terms of basic food safety practice, the basic blocking and tackling? I think that's made difficult in a lot of cases because a lot of companies just coming out of COVID had a lot of turnover in their workforce, and so you're kind of bringing new people in and training them up, and we're seeing too, just with challenges in the current food industry workforce right now in terms of just concerns from people that might have undocumented status, and that impacting or starting to impact some of the food manufacturing workforce. So again, we're in that space of uncertainty. I think really focusing on the things that truly matter from a food safety standpoint. So, temperature, time, sanitation, managing your processing environment. But also, I think even, on top of that, it's thinking about as you continue to do this work, how do you build the best food safety culture that you can at the same time, especially if you've got high turnover in your workforce, because you know, when you bring people in, you're going to want to teach them how to do food safety right. And so a lot of challenges right now, to be sure. And so I think, you know, we're all in this together, but again, you know, we try to be a resource to companies out there to really think through some of these things and even augment some of their, you know, the things that they maybe can't get to on their priority list, you know, help with things like process validation or kind of thinking through what good food safety culture looks like, or just even kind of a review of their basic food safety programs.
Okay. So one of the trends we're seeing is that states have been taking their own action on food safety issues, whether it's additives in food, chemicals in food, ultra-processed food, lab-grown meat. And at the same time, some people are criticizing the FDA for what they perceive as inaction. So how would you say this segmented approach has affected industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to throw another challenge on the fire, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, and I can say, having come out of and regulated, you know, at the state level in my past, you know, I think the system functions well when we're aligned around, you know, what true hazards and risks are. And so, you know, some of the things that we're seeing come out in terms of, you know, bans and things like that, I don't know that the science is there to necessarily support that. You know, I think we've seen more some of these initiatives driven by, you know, social media and influencers and things like that that then make it into legislation that passes at the state level. So what we've created is this really uneven kind of compliance landscape, if you will. So I can sell this product in one state versus I can't sell it in another state. You know, one example that's been around for a little while is like PFAS, like, you know, in food packaging, and so certain states have passed bans on PFAS in food packaging, and that I think is more widely recognized in the industry. But when we look, you know, an industry is trying to move to remove PFAS from food packaging, you know, just because of some of the concerns around those type of chemicals. But when we look at states too, oftentimes states will pass policy bills or regulations, but then there's not really an enforcement mechanism that goes behind that. So while the state says that you can't do something, nobody in that state is actually getting any resources to go out and enforce or look for those issues as well. So, you know, I think it just brings a lot of uncertainty into the marketplace, and, you know, I think the challenge right now is that at least at the federal level, we're not likely to see much in the way of new rulemaking. So trying to get alignment between kind of what the states are doing and what's happening at the federal level, I think is going to be a challenge for the next, you know, 3 years.
So another thing that happened recently is FDA announced that they were delaying the traceability compliance until July 2028. What advice do you have to companies who are still trying to prioritize traceability in their operations?
Yeah, take advantage of the homework extension. That's the advice. So, you know, I think a lot of companies were kind of racing towards this January 2026 deadline, you know, becoming aware of the rule when it passed back or when it became final back in November of 2022. But when we think about the challenges that are there, we're really talking about knitting together data electronically all across the supply chain in a way that it hasn't been before. So TAG has worked with Levitt Partners and with the FDA to create the Partnership for Food Traceability, which is a private-public partnership to really kind of wrap our arms around and address that issue. So we've got, you know, 30 or 40 members, companies, associations, regulators, regulatory associations, to really try to answer some of those questions. But, you know, within the membership of the Partnership for Food Traceability, we've said, don't wait, right? Because we're going to want to use the next 18 months to really think about how do we comply with this from a very technical standpoint, and then use that opportunity to then kind of, what I like to say is, connect the holiday lights, right? If you think about every node in the supply chain as a string, you know, you want to plug it all in and hopefully everything lights up. But, you know, if there's that one bulb that's out and then shaking it doesn't work, well, then you got to go back and fix it, and that can take time. So, you know, right now we're looking at June 20th, 2028, which sounds like a long time from now in terms of compliance, but I think the best thing that companies can do is continue to plan for compliance. First looking at kind of their own internal operations, and then figuring out how do I get information from my suppliers, how do I send that information to my customers, and I would strongly advocate folks to take a look at our website, the Partnership for Food Traceability. If you just Google that, there's a lot of good information there too, where people can look at and see what we're doing, and if they have any interest in joining, they can sign up right there.
Yeah, that is a great resource that we have covered in QA Magazine before, so thank you for bringing that up. What are some other key projects and initiatives that the Acheson Group is involved in right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of our day-to-day work still focuses on kind of helping people navigate those key food safety hazards. So again, kind of bringing it back to basics, like are my food safety programs really where they need to be from a risk standpoint? So a lot of our work is just that, helping our clients navigate that in a variety of ways. I think the other really key area that people are focused on, which is good, especially given the challenges that are out there, is looking at how do I first measure and assess my food safety culture, and then from there really make some key changes if I need to. Without that kind of foundation of a strong food safety culture, building the rest of those programs can be challenging. You want to have the right people in the right places. You want to have a workforce that's engaged, that's well trained, that knows the why behind what they're doing when they show up. So we're doing a lot of work in that space as well, and we're doing a lot of work, frankly, in kind of the chem talk space. There's questions around grass, and are we going to see a closing of the grass loophole? So we've got some experts on staff that really work quite a bit in that space, helping people look at and assess, are we dealing with our chemical hazards in our supply chain correctly? And if we do have a product that's out there that's that we've done a self-determined GRAS, does that kind of stand up if we need to turn around and send that into FDA for review at some point? So those are some of the probably big three areas where we're doing quite a bit of work right now, but there are many others too.